This is a 1967 GT500 coupe, the only one ever built.
My name's Carroll Shelby, and performance is my business.
Carroll Shelby's personal garage was never a building. It was the paperwork he left behind, the ledgers, the build sheets, the invoices nobody had bothered to open in 50 years. And when specialists finally got inside those records, they were only there to confirm what everyone already knew.
Carroll Shelby is an American icon, an individual that I really looked up to.
That one of his strangest cars had been crushed into scrap decades ago, exactly like the company said. That is not what the documents told them. Something in Shelby's own files did not match the story the entire collector world had been repeating since the 1960s. And it pointed somewhere nobody had thought to look. The man who built cars to embarrass Europe. Carroll Shelby was a Texas racer with a failing heart. The condition forced him out of the driver's seat before he was 40, and for most men, that would have ended the story. Shelby simply changed weapons. If he could not beat Europe from behind the wheel, he would beat it from the workshop. He looked at a lightweight British roadster and imagined it carrying American V8 power. The result was the Cobra, a car so raw and so violent it felt almost rude next to the polished machines it humiliated.
Testing with the superchargers in the big block and the GT500, Little Red was doing that in 1967.
Shelby's genius was never subtlety. It was combination. Take European handling, add American horsepower, delete the nonsense, and build something that made the establishment nervous. That reputation is why Ford came calling. Shelby American sharpened the GT40 into the car that beat Ferrari at Le Mans, and Ford handed him the Mustang next, turning from pony car into the GT350 and the GT500. But the cars Ford sold in showrooms were never the interesting ones. Behind every badge was a stranger world: test mules, rejected parts, engineering dead ends, machines built to answer a question and then quietly disposed of. One of them was a small red coupe the company called Little Red. The car everyone thought was dead. Little Red was a 1967 Shelby GT 500 EXP, and it looked wrong from every angle a Shelby is supposed to look right from. It was not a fastback. It was a notchback coupe, a hardtop roof on a car whose entire identity was built on the fastback silhouette. Alongside the 1968 Green Hornet, it was one of only two notchbacks ever to carry the Shelby name. The body was only the surface strangeness. Little Red was a development car, a rolling laboratory where Ford and Shelby American tested things the production line was not ready for. Big block power, supercharging, styling ideas that had not been approved by anyone. It was not a normal production Shelby. It was a question on wheels.
This was Carroll's answer to beating Ferrari on the track.
What could the Mustang become if Shelby stopped asking permission? In the 1960s, that question had a short shelf life. Once a prototype answered it, the company had every reason to make the car disappear. Liability, intellectual property, obsolete engineering, experimental parts nobody wanted floating around in public hands. Development cars were used hard, then crushed or stripped without records. Nobody in 1967 imagined that a strange Shelby notchback might one day be worth millions and rewrite Mustang history. So when Little Red vanished from the record, the explanation wrote itself. Collectors knew it had existed. There were photographs, memories, old documents, but the car was gone, and everyone agreed it had gone to the crusher. But the most dangerous assumption in automotive history is that a lost car is dead just because the paperwork says it should be. Green Hornet opens the door. The hunt restarted because of a different car. Craig Jackson, chairman and CEO of Barrett Jackson, owned the 1968 Shelby GT 500 prototype known as the Green Hornet, the other experimental notchback, fitted with electronic fuel injection, four-wheel disc brakes, and independent rear suspension at a time when none of that belonged anywhere near a Mustang. Green Hornet existed. It was sitting right there, being restored. And that fact bothered restoration specialist Jason Billups more than it should have. Billups had spent his career inside the physical evidence of these cars. The welds, the stampings, the seams that tell you who built what and when. He had watched the Little Red story get repeated for years as settled fact, and he could not find the moment where anyone had actually proved it. No crusher receipt, no scrap record, no photograph of the end. Only an assumption that had hardened into history because nobody had pushed on it. If one experimental notchback had survived 50 years, why was everyone so certain the other had not? Collectors told him he was wasting his time. Billups went back to look at why every previous search had died in the same place. The VIN that changed everything. The searches had all failed for the same reason, and it had nothing to do with luck. Every hunt for Little Red had chased the Shelby serial number. That was the famous number, the number on the paperwork collectors cared about, the number that made the car a Shelby. And it led nowhere, every time, for decades. But the car had two identities. Before Shelby American touched it, it was a Ford, and it wore a Ford VIN. That second number was buried underneath the legend, unglamorous and ignored. And it was the one attached to the ordinary paper trail of the real world.
The guy that was responsible for this piece of history still existing.
Titles, registrations, transfers, the boring documents that follow a car through every owner it ever has. A badge can make a car famous. A VIN can make it real. Billups and the team stopped searching for the Shelby and started searching for the Ford. The dead end opened immediately. Registrations, ownership changes, a chain of names stretching across decades until the paper stopped moving and settled in rural North Texas. If the idea that a legend can hide behind the wrong number just landed for you, this is the moment to subscribe. Because the trail was still warm, and what that number led to had been sitting in the dirt the entire time. Everything that follows depends on what the team found when the paperwork ran out. March 3rd, 2018. No museum, no cover, no lighting. What the team walked up to was a hardtop Mustang shell sitting outside in a rural North Texas property among other forgotten cars, in the position of something nobody had valued in a very long time. The engine was gone. The transmission was gone. Body panels were missing. The paint had been out in the weather for years, dulled and blistered and streaked where the sun had gotten to it. Weeds had grown around the tires. Anyone could have walked past it, and thousands almost certainly had. To an ordinary eye, it was a junk shell worth its metal, a tired 60s Mustang like 100,000 others rotting quietly across the country. Then the team checked the VIN. Craig Jackson and Mustang expert Kevin Marty ran the authentication, and what came back was not a junk shell. It was the 1967 Shelby GT 500 EXP, a car the collector world had recorded as destroyed, sitting in a field, intact enough to prove itself. Why it should not have existed. Understand what those 50 years actually looked like for this car, because it explains why nobody found it. Little Red was never protected. It was not stored by a collector who knew what he had. It passed through owners who had no idea, got moved, got parked, got stripped for the parts that were worth taking. Every step that kept it alive was accidental. Its survival was not preservation. It was neglect that happened to run in the right direction. A prototype is more vulnerable than an ordinary car, not less. If nobody knows what it is, it gets parted out. If the paperwork is confusing, it gets ignored.
I shut it down when it was approaching 100 miles an hour, just in no time at all.
If the body looks unremarkable, it gets mistaken for something far less important. There is no protective instinct around a car that looks like a mistake. Little Red survived because nobody destroyed it at the right moment. And that accident matters because production cars show what companies were willing to sell. Prototypes show what builders were willing to try. The question is what, exactly, this one had been built to try. And the answer turned out to be bigger than the car. The ideas that arrived too early. Little Red and Green Hornet were not fast toys. They were arguments about where the Mustang could go. Green Hornet carried independent rear suspension, four-wheel disc brakes, and electronic fuel injection in 1968. Technology the American performance market would take decades to accept. Little Red was tied to supercharging, big block power, and styling experiments that pushed past what any production Mustang was allowed to be. None of it was a small tweak. These cars were not only fast, they were early, carrying ideas before the production systems, the budgets, the dealers, and the lawyers could make peace with them, which raises an uncomfortable question about the second one. If Little Red was a dead end, why does its influence show up on cars people were buying in 1968? The California Special Connection. The 1968 Mustang California Special brought a Shelby-influenced look to a much wider audience than any Shelby ever reached, and Little Red's styling helped inspire it. So the prototype was never really a dead end. Its DNA reached the street in a different form, under a different name, while the car itself was disappearing into obscurity. That is often how experimental cars shape history. They rarely become production models directly. A stance survives. A body treatment survives. A trim idea moves sideways into something else while the original vanishes. For decades, people had been looking at echoes of a car they believed had been destroyed. It was like finding the missing first draft of a famous book after generations had already read the published version. What Shelby was actually hiding. The fictional version of this story is a locked building and one final wild machine kept from the corporate suits. That version is more satisfying and completely wrong, and it is worth rejecting clearly because the truth is stranger. Shelby's secret was not a place, it was a working method. Cars built in the narrow space between official permission and practical madness. He needed Ford's money, engines, and manufacturing scale. Ford needed his credibility, his instinct, and his willingness to make performance feel dangerous. That partnership produced legends and constant friction because corporations want repeatable products and Shelby wanted results. Prototypes like Little Red existed inside that friction, which is exactly why bringing one back 50 years later turned out to be far harder than finding it. The restoration dilemma. Once the car was authenticated, a genuine argument started. One position says a car like this should stay exactly as found. Rust, missing panels, weathered paint intact. The car is evidence. Every scar documents the 50 years it spent avoiding destruction, and restoring it erases the proof. The other says Shelby did not build cars to sit dead under lights. He built them to run. Honoring that means rebuilding the engine, recreating the experimental setup, and letting people hear it. Craig Jackson and the restoration team chose to bring it back while documenting the process in detail, and immediately hit the problem unique to prototypes. There was no clean production specification to restore it to. The car had been modified repeatedly during its working life because modification was its job. Restoring a prototype is restoring a moving target. You have to choose which moment in its life you are trying to save. They chose. And in January 2020, The world got to see what that decision looked like. The day it came back, Little Red was unveiled publicly at Barrett-Jackson in Scottsdale, Arizona, in January 2020, restored, red, and standing beside the Green Hornet. For the first time, both experimental Shelby notchbacks were in the same room in finished form. The reveal did more than end a rumor. It proved that a myth can survive for 50 years on nothing but repetition, and that a car recorded as destroyed can still be recovered when someone refuses to accept the old answer. This was not a lucky barn find. A barn find uncovers something rare. This forced historians to correct the record. The car was not simply located, it was recovered from a belief. Why collectors cannot let it go. The only GT 500 coupe built by Shelby American, one of two experimental Shelby notchbacks, a prototype tied to supercharging and California special styling, a car the record listed as destroyed, found after decades of failed searches. But the money is not the point. The point is that the Shelby world is one of the most heavily documented corners of car culture, and it still got this wrong for 50 years. Missing records, forgotten photographs, wrong assumptions, and old yards full of cars nobody has looked at properly. All of it is still out there. So, what do you think? Is Little Red the greatest lost Shelby discovery ever made? Or is there another prototype still sitting under a tarp somewhere, waiting for someone to check the right number? Tell me in the comments which one you think is still out there. And if you want more stories about lost cars, buried factory records, and the prototypes, the history books wrote off too early, subscribe, and turn on notifications so the next one finds you.